The wind at 10,000 feet doesn't howl. It scrapes. It peels the moisture from your eyes and the heat from your bones. When the shot finally broke, the bullet took 9 seconds to reach the valley floor. 9 seconds of absolute silence before history rewrote itself in the dirt. Commander David Rollins dropped the manila folder onto the aluminum table. It landed with a flat, unimpressive smack that echoed too loudly in the sterile confines of the debriefing room. 3,000? Rollins dragged a heavy hand down his face, feeling the sandpaper grit of a 2-day beard. He stared at the typed numbers as if they might rearrange themselves into something rational. 247 meters. He looked up. Riley Quinn didn't blink. She sat on the folding chair across from him like a piece of discarded equipment. Her shoulders were slumped, her hands resting flat, palms down on her thighs. She still smelled like the mountain. It was a distinct, inescapable odor. Crushed shale, dried sweat, and the sharp, metallic tang of cold that seemed to sink into a sniper's pores and never really leave. Her uniform was stiff with dried mud and chalky dust. The skin around her eyes was pale where her ballistic goggles had been. The rest of her face painted in a cracked veneer of dirt, sunburn, and camouflage grease. She looked entirely hollowed out. There was no triumph in her posture, no arrogance, just the profound, bone-deep exhaustion of a human being who had pushed past the absolute limits of physical endurance and was now running on the fumes of survival instinct. 3.2 kilometers, Quinn, Rollins said, his voice dropping an octave, trying to find a wedge into the silence. 2 miles, a football field 32 times over. I know what the distance is, sir, Riley said. Her voice was wrecked. It sounded like tearing paper. She swallowed, wincing as her throat worked. Rollins leaned back in his chair, the metal creaking in protest. He was a pragmatic man. He had spent 22 years in the teams. He knew ballistics. He knew the curvature of the Earth, the Coriolis effect, spin drift, aerodynamic jump. He knew that pushing a bullet past 2,000 meters was a roll of the dice. Past 3,000, it was playing God with math you couldn't control. A laser rangefinder doesn't even paint reliably at that distance, Rollins pointed out, keeping his tone perfectly level. He wasn't accusing her, not yet, but he was building the wall she was going to have to climb over. Jackson Cooper shifted in the chair beside Riley. Spotters never got the glory, but they owned the math. Cooper looked worse than Quinn. His lips were split and bleeding sluggishly in the dry, air-conditioned breeze of the room. His hands, resting on the table, were trembling with a micro-tremor he couldn't suppress. The aftermath of severe hypothermia. Sir, Cooper croaked. He paused, coughing into his fist. I lased the granite face directly behind the target's vehicle. We had a solid return ping. 3, 2, 4, 7. The environmental data is in the Kestrel log. I handed over the SD card to Intel 10 minutes ago. Rollins opened the folder again. He looked at the handwritten dope, data on previous engagement, scribbled on a waterproof notepad page that had been torn out and paperclipped to the official after-action report. It was a mess of numbers, wind calls, barometric pressure readings, and elevation adjustments. I'm not calling you liars, Rollins said softly. The hum of the fluorescent lights above them seemed to amplify. But you understand what you are handing me? The politicians, the brass at SOCOM, they don't read sniper logs, they read headlines. The current combat record is 3,540 meters by a Canadian unit. And they had a month to dial in that valley. They fired multiple rounds to walk it in. Rollins tapped the paper with a thick finger. You had 3 days. You were shooting at a downward angle of 22 degrees. You were using a Macmillan TAC-50, firing a standard 750-grain Hornady A Max. You're telling me you made a cold-bore shot, first-round impact at 3¼ kilometers, on a moving target? The target had stopped, Riley said. Her eyes, pale blue and entirely flat, met Rollins's gaze. There was no defensiveness in them. It was a simple correction of fact. He stopped to urinate, Cooper added, his voice devoid of humor. Stepped out of the Hilux. That's when the wind died. Rollins let out a slow, ragged breath. He looked between the two of them. A female SEAL making it through the pipeline was history in itself. Riley had dealt with the media circus, the internal pushback, the quiet doubts of men who smiled to her face and whispered behind her back. She had silenced them by being violently, undeniably competent. But this was a claim that invited a microscope. If they couldn't prove it, it would be framed as a desperate grab for glory. It would ruin her. It would ruin Cooper. Walk me through it, Rollins said, pulling a yellow legal pad toward him. He uncapped his pen. From the insertion, leave nothing out, because when the inquiry board sits you down tomorrow, they are going to try and tear you apart. You better have every single variable accounted for. Riley slowly closed her eyes. For a second, Rollins thought she might actually fall asleep sitting upright. But when she opened them, the flat exhaustion had retreated, replaced by the chilling, hyper-focused clarity that made her the deadliest asset in his platoon. Insertion was 0200 Tuesday, Riley began, her voice steadying. Elevation, 8,000 feet, and it was snowing. The Black Hawk hadn't even touched down. The pilots were terrified of the mountain's unpredictable thermals. They hovered 3 feet above a jagged ridgeline, the rotor wash kicking up a blinding maelstrom of snow, ice, and razor-sharp shale. Riley and Cooper dropped from the skids into the darkness, 75 pounds of gear strapped to their backs, the air so thin it felt like breathing through a cocktail straw. By the time the helicopter banked away, the cold had already begun to gnaw through their base layers. The objective was simple on paper. Overwatch the primary smuggling artery in the Coast Gardez Pass. Wait for a high-value facilitator known only by his radio call sign, the Architect. Terminate him. Exfiltrate. The reality was a vertical ascent up 2,000 feet of sheer, unforgiving rock in -10-degree weather. They climbed in absolute silence. You don't talk on a night insertion. You don't complain. You just put one boot in front of the other, feeling your lungs burn and your muscles scream, praying the night vision goggles don't wash out when you look down into the black void below. It took them 7 hours to reach the precipice. The hide, their nest, was a cruel joke of geology. It was a shallow depression beneath an overhanging slab of granite, measuring maybe 4 feet wide and 6 feet long. It offered defilade from the biting northern wind, but it was essentially a stone coffin. Set, Cooper had whispered, his breath pluming in the green phosphor glow of Riley's NVGs. For the next 72 hours, that 6x4 patch of freezing rock was their entire universe. People who watch movies think sniping is about pulling a trigger. It isn't. Sniping is about managing misery. It is the art of lying perfectly still while your body begs you to move. It is pissing into a plastic bag without shifting your hips enough to disturb the camouflage netting above you. It is eating frozen, high-calorie paste from a tube, rationing sips of water that you have to thaw inside your own jacket, pressed against your chest. By the second day, the numbness in Riley's toes had turned to a dull, throbbing ache. That was good. It meant the tissue wasn't dead yet. She lay behind the massive Macmillan TAC 50, her eye pressed to the rubber cup of the Nightforce scope. The rifle was a beast, nearly 30 pounds of machined steel and composite, chambered in .50 BMG. It wasn't an elegant weapon. It was an anti-material rifle, designed to crack engine blocks. but with match-grade ammunition, it could reach out and touch God. Below them, the valley stretched out like a scarred lunar landscape. The road was a thin, winding ribbon of dirt flanked by sheer drops. "Wind is swirling," Cooper murmured on the afternoon of the third day. He was lying parallel to her, peering through the spotting scope. The Kestrel weather meter was clamped to a small tripod near his head, feeding him constant data. "I see it," Riley replied. Her voice was a ghost. She hadn't spoken above a whisper in 3 days. Looking through high-powered optics across 3 kilometers of atmosphere is like looking through moving water. The mirage, the heat waves rising from the sun-baked rocks, distorted the valley floor. It made the road ripple and dance. Worse was the wind. It was never just one wind. "We got a full-value crosswind right out of the muzzle. Maybe 10 knots, Cooper muttered, doing the mental gymnastics that kept Riley alive. Then it dies in the middle of the valley. But look at the dust kicking up near the target zone. We've got an updraft riding the canyon wall, pushing right to left." Riley adjusted her parallax. She could see the dust. It was subtle, a faint haze shifting against the beige rock. At 3,000 meters, you aren't aiming at the target. You are aiming at a patch of empty air, trusting the wind to push your bullet back onto the target. You have to account for the Coriolis effect, the literal rotation of the Earth. While the bullet is in the air for 9 seconds, the planet spins beneath it. In the northern hemisphere, shooting south, the shot will drift right. You have to aim left just to let the Earth bring the target to the bullet. It was math. Cold, hard, unforgiving math. "Convoy," Cooper suddenly said. His body tensed. Riley shifted her grip on the rifle's pistol grip. Her finger rested flat against the trigger guard. She settled her breathing, letting her heart rate drop. Thump, thump, thump. Through the scope, 3 tiny specks appeared on the ribbon of dirt, miles below. 2 pickup trucks and a rusted SUV. "Distance," Riley said. Cooper hit the laser rangefinder. It failed. The beam scattered in the dust and the heat. He swore softly. "No ping. Stand by." He adjusted, aiming for the massive sheer wall of granite directly behind the vehicles. He pressed the button again. "Beep." "Got it," Cooper said, his voice tightening. 3,247 meters. Angle is -22 degrees. Riley did not react. She didn't gasp. She didn't say it was too far. She simply processed the data. "Run it," she said. Cooper was tapping furiously into his ballistic calculator strapped to his wrist. "Drop is... Jesus! Drop is 4,120 inches, 343 feet. If Riley aimed directly at the truck, the bullet would hit the dirt a football field below it. She had to aim higher than the scope's internal elevation turrets would allow. She would have to dial her scope to the absolute maximum and then use the mil-dots in the reticle to hold over the target. She would essentially be aiming into the empty sky above the valley. "Hold over is 32 mils, Cooper said, his voice dropping into the sterile cadence of a firing solution. "Wind is a nightmare, Riley. Call it. Hold left 4.5 mils. Riley dialed the turrets. Click, click, click. Every sound was deafening in the silence of the hide. Through the scope, the target was infinitely small. It was a pixel. It was a germ. "They're moving too fast," Riley whispered. The vehicles were doing maybe 30 miles an hour, but at that distance, the time of flight was 9 seconds. If she fired, the truck would be 100 yards away by the time the bullet arrived. Leading a target by 100 yards was guesswork. It wasn't sniping, it was artillery. "Wait," Cooper said. They watched. The vehicles snaked along the mountain pass. 5 minutes passed. 10. Riley's eye began to water from the strain of staring through the glass. She blinked it away. refusing to pull her head back. Then the lead truck slowed. It pulled toward the rock wall and stopped. The SUV and the trailing truck did the same. "Why are they stopping?" Cooper asked. "Don't care," Riley breathed. A figure stepped out of the passenger side of the SUV. Even through the massive magnification, it was just a dark smudge against the tan dirt. But the smudge walked to the edge of the cliff, unzipped his trousers, and stood still. "Target is static," Cooper said, his voice instantly dropping an octave. "That's him. Intel said he's traveling in the middle vehicle." Riley inhaled. The air was like ice water in her lungs. She looked at the mirage. The heat waves were standing straight up. "Wind just died," Cooper whispered, a note of disbelief in his voice. "The updraft is gone. Mirage is boiling straight up. It's a dead calm." It wouldn't last. The mountain breathed. It would exhale again in seconds. "Solution?" Riley asked. "Hold elevation. Hold left 1 mil for spindrift and Coriolis. Send it." Riley exhaled. She let all the air out of her lungs. At the bottom of her breath, between the beats of her heart, her finger slid from the guard to the curved shoe of the trigger. She didn't pull. She added pressure until the sear broke itself. The Macmillan roared. The concussion in the tiny rock hide was violent. Dust exploded from the roof of their overhang. The recoil punched into Riley's shoulder with the force of a sledgehammer, but she kept her eye glued to the scope, fighting to get the sight picture back. "Shot," Cooper said. Then silence. 1,000, 2,000, 3,000. Riley watched the empty sky above the valley. 4,000, 5,000, 6,000. Did I pull it? Did the wind catch it? 7,000, 8,000, 9,000. Through the optics, the dark smudge standing by the cliff edge suddenly snapped violently to the right, collapsing into a heap of rags in the dirt. A fraction of a second later, a faint puff of red mist dispersed into the dry air. Cooper let out a breath that sounded like a sob. "Impact," he whispered. "Center mass." Rollins stopped writing. The tip of his pen hovered over the yellow legal pad, leaving a small dark bleed of blue ink on the paper. 9 seconds, Rollins repeated softly. It wasn't a question. Riley shifted in the folding chair, the stiff, dried mud on her uniform cracking at the shoulders. 9 seconds of flight time, sir. Yes? Cooper leaned his head back against the cinder-block wall, his eyes half closed, his jaw tight with the lingering ache of the cold. "It felt like an hour, Commander. I watched the trace. You can see the vapor trail of the bullet if the conditions are right. A tiny distortion in the air. I tracked it all the way down. It dropped straight out of the sky like a mortar round." Rollins looked back at the paperwork. He knew what happened next. Pulling the trigger was only 5% of a sniper's job. The real work was getting out alive after you just told everyone in the valley exactly where you were. "Walk me through the exfil," Rollins said. Riley's eyes dropped to her hands. They were raw, the knuckles split, dirt ground so deeply into the cuticles it looked like ink. "The valley erupted," Riley said, her voice flattening into a monotone. They didn't know where the shot came from. They just knew their boss's chest had suddenly caved in. It took them maybe 10 seconds to react. Then they just started shooting at the sky. Up on the mountain, the silence following the shot had been shattered by the erratic, panicked chatter of AK-47s and the heavy, rhythmic thud of a DSHK heavy machine gun mounted in the bed of the trailing pickup. Heavy tracers the size of carrots began arcing up the canyon walls, blind and angry. Most of them impacted 1,000 feet below the hide, sparking against the granite, but sound travels, and the supersonic crack of the .50 caliber bullet had echoed off the basin, creating a deceptive auditory illusion. "They were sweeping the ridgeline," Cooper rasped. "We didn't wait to see if they figured out the geometry. We packed." Packing in a confined hide while your hands are numb is an exercise in agonizing frustration. You can't leave anything behind. No brass, No wrappers, no equipment. Every ounce of gear had to go back into the rucks. Riley broke down the Macmillan, her frozen fingers clumsy against the frigid steel. She shoved the heavy barrel and receiver into her drag bag, securing it across her back. It felt like strapping an anvil to a bruised spine. The storm rolled back in at 1400 hours, Riley told Rollins. Visibility dropped to 0. It saved us from any optical spotting from the valley floor, but it grounded the extract bird. We walked, Cooper said simply. They walked for 14 hours. Down climbing a mountain in a whiteout blizzard is a slow, methodical flirtation with death. The shale was coated in fresh, slick ice. The wind howled, a deafening roar that made communication impossible. They had tied themselves together with a length of tubular nylon webbing, a makeshift alpine tether. If one fell, the other would act as an anchor, or they would both die. At hour 6, Cooper's body began to fail. He didn't complain. Seals don't complain. His body simply stopped generating heat. His shivering had ceased, a terrifying clinical sign that his core temperature had plummeted into severe hypothermia. He stumbled. Then he fell. When he tried to push himself up, his arms gave out. Riley had stopped, hauling on the nylon webbing. She waded back through the waist-deep snowdrifts. Cooper was looking up at her, his lips blue, his eyelashes caked in solid ice. He looked drunk. "Leave the bag," Riley had shouted over the wind, her face inches from his. Cooper had weakly shaken his head, clutching his 70-pound ruck. It held the optics, the laser rangefinder, the SD cards containing the shot data, the proof. I said, "Drop the damn bag, Jackson." Riley didn't wait for his compliance. She unclipped his sternum strap, dragged the heavy pack off his shoulders, and hoisted it onto her own front. She was carrying her own ruck, the 30-pound sniper rifle, and now Cooper's gear. Over 130 pounds of dead weight. She dragged him to his feet. She wrapped his arm over her shoulder. "One step," she told him, her voice cracking against the cold. "Take one step." They moved like a wounded, two-headed animal through the dark. Riley's vision tunneled. Her lungs burned as if she were breathing crushed glass. Her muscles tore and screamed, but she shut off the pain. She compartmentalized it. She focused entirely on the patch of snow directly in front of her boots. Left foot, right foot, left foot. They reached the secondary extraction zone at 0400, a flat plateau of rock exposed to the wind. They huddled beneath an emergency space blanket, Riley pressing her body against Cooper's, desperately trying to transfer whatever heat she had left into his failing organs. When the Black Hawk finally broke through the cloud cover at dawn, its landing lights cutting through the blowing snow, Riley didn't feel relief. She felt nothing. The tank was completely empty. The debriefing room door clicked open. Rollins looked up. Captain Miles from Intelligence stood in the doorway. He was holding a locked digital tablet. Miles was a desk jockey, immaculate in a pressed uniform, smelling faintly of aftershave and bad coffee. He looked at Riley and Cooper, his expression unreadable. "Commander," Miles said, stepping into the room. The door clicked shut behind him. "We're in the middle of it, Miles," Rollins said, a warning edge to his voice. "I need their statements tight before the SOCOM board sits them down tomorrow." Miles didn't look at Rollins. He looked directly at Riley. The female SEAL stared back, her face a mask of exhausted indifference. "There isn't going to be a board tomorrow?" Miles said quietly. Rollins frowned. "Why?" Miles walked to the aluminum table and laid the tablet down. He tapped a code into the screen. "Because boards are for inquiries. We don't need an inquiry. We need a press blackout." He spun the tablet around. On the screen was a high-resolution black-and-white satellite feed, a synthetic aperture radar image. It was time-stamped. Tuesday, 13:42, local time. National Reconnaissance Office had a bird passing over the Coast Guard's sector. Miles explained, his voice tight. They were tasking it to look for a completely different target, but the pass caught the valley. He hit play. The grainy video showed the 3 vehicles stopped on the mountain road. It showed the tiny heat signature of a man walking to the edge of the cliff. We pulled the audio intercepts from the valley 10 minutes after your scheduled exfil window, Miles continued. The target's lieutenants were screaming over open radio channels in a panic, screaming for a medic, screaming that the architect was dead. Miles paused the video. He zoomed in on the pixelated figure by the cliff. We cross-referenced the SAR imagery with the laser data Cooper pulled from the rock face. NGA analysts ran the topographical geometry 3 times in the last hour to be absolutely certain. Rollins leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. And 3,247.2 meters, Miles said. The number hung in the air, heavy and irrefutable. Your math was flawless, Cooper. The bullet impacted the target's upper left quadrant. Instant catastrophic trauma. Miles looked at Riley. He wasn't smiling. He looked almost disturbed, like a man who had just watched someone bend the laws of physics with their bare hands. You beat the Canadian record by over 200 meters, Chief Quinn, Miles said, his tone hushed. It is the longest confirmed sniper kill in human history. The fluorescent lights hummed. Rollins let out a long, slow breath. The tension in his shoulders finally uncoiled. He looked at Riley. He expected a smile, a nod, a tear of relief. Riley just stared at the tablet. She remembered the 9 seconds. She remembered the silence. She remembered the sheer, terrifying isolation of pulling a trigger and watching a life end from a distance so vast the victim never even heard the gun. There was no glory in it. It was a mathematical execution, a necessary brutality, sanitized by distance, but a brutality all the same. She thought about the hours in the freezing dirt, the taste of rust in her mouth, the feeling of Cooper's heart fluttering irregularly against her back as she carried him down the mountain. That was the reality of the record. Pain, cold, survival. Are we done here, sir? Riley asked. Her voice was flat, empty of any emotion. Rollins studied her for a long moment. He saw the toll it had taken. You don't make a shot like that without leaving a piece of your soul up on that ridgeline. We're done, Chief, Rollins said softly. He closed the manila folder. Go get some sleep. Both of you. Medbay first for Cooper. Riley stood up. Her joints popped. She reached down and gripped Cooper's arm, helping the spotter to his feet. He swayed slightly, leaning heavily on her shoulder. They didn't salute. They just turned and walked toward the door. 2 ghosts returning to the land of the living. Rollins watched them go. He looked down at the scribbled math on his yellow legal pad. 3,247 meters. He shook his head, tore the page from the pad, and fed it into the shredder in the corner of the room. Some things didn't need to be written down to be remembered. The wind at 10,000 feet doesn't howl, it scrapes. And for 9 seconds, Riley Quinn had owned it. Thank you for reading this story. If you enjoyed this intense, grounded dive into the gritty reality of tactical operations and the raw human endurance behind the scope, please hit the like button below. Share this video with anyone who appreciates authentic, suspenseful storytelling. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our upcoming military fiction deep dives. Drop a comment below. What part of the shot sequence shocked you the most?